Welcome everybody. It is great to have you back. My name is Mike Craig from Nutrislice. I am thrilled today. One, just to hang out and chat, talk new things about food service. But more importantly, I am super excited. Today we have a really inspiring business owner, Jenna Kaczmarski. Hello and howdy. How are you doing today?
Hi, Mike. I'm great. Good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it is fantastic to have you. So, Jenna, just as an introduction to everyone here, you are a co-founder of Locally Grown, which it's an inspiring and it's an exciting endeavor. And you're trying to build resilient and equitable food systems across the country, but especially in Florida, which is where you reside.
That's right. We have started a nonprofit. We are in Tampa, Florida. And so, what we're doing is we're going to start locally, which makes sense because we're going to build a resilient and local food system here. And then we're going to just see where that takes us. So, we hope to expand out into Florida and who knows beyond that.
That is awesome. Now, Jenna, you and I go back many years, but when we first met, uh, you just had this awesome career. You were kind of serving millions and millions of meals, every year to millions of students across the state of Florida, especially along that I-4 corridor. So, Tampa to Orlando and everything in between. What is the inspiration for you with Locally Grown? How did this get started?
Yeah, I do remember the first time that we met. We were at a school nutrition industry conference, and Nutrislice was pretty new, and it was really exciting. And I remember enjoying meeting you and going back and forth and talking about how you could, you know, how you could best serve school nutrition. And I was very eager to let you know that, right? I don't know if you remember that. I wasn't shy about that at all. But to go back a little bit, so I'm from Illinois. That's where I was raised, and there was agriculture all around me. I had a cornfield in my front yard. So we didn't own it. It was just like it was kind of in front of our house because if you've ever been to the Midwest, there's this huge field, lots of corn,
There's
lots of
cornfields.
soybeans.
There's cornfields in everyone's front yard if you're raised
Exactly.
in the
You just
Midwest.
drive along and that's what you yeah, you drive along and that's what you see. So after college, I needed to do my internship to become a registered dietitian. And I didn't have everything figured out, but I knew I wanted to work with kids. And so I sought out internships that might allow me to do that. And I was very fortunate to get matched with the Florida Department of Education. And so at the time, school nutrition reported to the Department of Education. Now we report to Department of Agriculture.
Right.
So at the time, we were in Department of Education. I became an intern, and I quite truthfully did not think I would end up in school nutrition. I just that was one of the internships that exposed me to kids and children's hospitals and things like that. So that was my motivation. But then when I got there and I met the people at the State Department, and I got to go out on administrative reviews with them, which was a really great insight into the back end of school nutrition and what was happening in school cafeterias. And it really opened my eyes to the possibilities of being a dietitian in a district. And when I first started, that was just sort of a new concept. Like the dietitians weren't in every school district necessarily. And so there were lots of opportunities. And I went from Tallahassee to Polk County. So that was where my first job was in Polk County Public Schools. We had about 100,000 students there.
Wow.
Marcia Smith was the first director, and she was just a wonderful mentor and gave me an opportunity straight out of internship. And when I took the job, I didn't think I would stay there. You know what I mean? It was like, oh, this will be a great like starting point, and who knows what'll happen. I was living in Tampa, which is where I still live today. So, like you said, that I-4 corridor, Polk County is in between Tampa and Orlando. And a lot of people don't even like always know that it's there. We get forgotten about a lot of times, but I was living in Tampa and commuting, and I was like, I don't know how long I could do this 45-minute commute. And
It all
fast
starts with a
forward,
45-minute commute.
right? I mean, exactly. And fast forward 16 years, I was still there until about a year ago. I never really thought I would stay that long, but I loved the people. I loved the kids. There were so many opportunities for me there. So I moved up through a couple different roles and spent my last 5 years as the director.
Yeah.
And about a year ago, I just had some personal things going on in my life. I had my son, and he's 5. I became the director literally when my son was born. Like, I went from the hospital to my interview. I like telling that story because I think it's really important to highlight moms and working moms and how hard that is. And so I always like to bring that up,
That's
the
awesome.
hoops that we jump through and the things that we do. So I left the hospital, went to my interview, came back, took him home like I think the next day. And
Wait,
it's
wait.
just,
You took him home from the hospital. Like you literally left the hospital to a job interview to become the director.
yeah, so now this is getting a little even more personal, but I had my son 6 weeks early.
Oh,
So
okay.
it was supposed to work out. I'm very calculated, and I like to plan things out. And so everything was going to work out just perfectly. And then he came 6 weeks early. So the whole interview process, was happening. And so he actually had to stay in the hospital for a little while.
Okay.
And yeah, so I
Okay.
left the hospital while he was still there.
Holy
No, so
smokes.
it's not quite, yeah, not quite the same. Like, I hadn't just given birth or anything. There had been a little bit of time there. And went and did my interview and then came back. So I don't know why I went through down that rabbit hole for you right
Your
there. But
registration on the impressive scale just keeps going up and up. That is an amazing story. And so, I mean, how could anyone even compete with you in terms of getting the job?
so I think I've taken the long road around to answer your question now. But I did want to just highlight, I had spent 16 years in Polk County and I loved it there and I loved school nutrition. And I had to go through a lot of mental gymnastics to figure out what I needed to do next because things just weren't lining up for me, like work life balance. And I needed to find balance
Right.
there. And so about a year ago, the pandemic was so difficult. I have to give credit for the school nutrition folks that are still like dealing
Marching.
with that and everything they've had to go through. Yeah,
Yeah.
it took a toll on me. So I just made some decisions for myself and ended up deciding to take a stab at independent consulting just to kind of give myself some more flexibility and to figure some things out. I didn't want to just try and jump right into some other full-time job that, you know, would have put me in the same boat. So I thought consulting would give me that flexibility to figure things out.
Right.
And so Ariane Corbett is an amazing friend of mine, and she was a colleague that I had met through No Kid Hungry. And she had been a consultant for quite a while. And so her and I started sort of working together and meeting on a regular basis and just brainstorming, two RDs who love working with kids and are passionate about, child nutrition and nutrition security, and what could we do together to make bigger impact. So that was kind of the impetus of all of this. And then I was very passionate about agriculture and wanted to learn more about our food systems in this country. It's a really, really complex system. And I'm not yet an expert, but I plan to be by the time I retire. This is kind of my mid-career jump. And so I started educating myself more and more about agriculture and food systems. And when her and I were talking about how can we support child nutrition programs, because there was just no way after 16 years that I was gonna completely go to something else. I just couldn't do it. Like, it's in my blood now to work with school nutrition programs. And we saw all of the supply chain issues that were happening. And there were these glimmers of hope where districts who had already sort of developed more local purchasing practices were in a lot of ways in better shape when it came to supply chain issues. So that was one thing that we identified. And so we just started to put all these pieces together and we came up with the idea of locally grown. It kind of grew over several months. And now right now we're kind of launching. So it took us about 6 months to get all the pieces together and we're sort of launching right now. So this is really great timing.
Yeah. That's the process. I love the story. And don't all good business ventures start, with close connections and friends inside the space? And you're just brainstorming and talking, asking a lot of what if questions. Really, how do you turn something upside down? And you just stumble upon an idea and it just hits, and you totally run with it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like we kept saying like we kept uncovering things piece by piece, and we would meet with one person and then they would tell us, oh, you need to meet with this person, and we kept just having these lovely conversations with people, and it all just started to unfold, and we were like, I think we're onto something here. I think this could be really great. And we just kept getting more and more excited about it.
Yeah.
But connections are so important. Like because I spent so long in one district, you can kind of get in your own bubble, and you have to remember how important partnerships are and how you need other people. And that was kind of hard for me when I then became a consultant, because you don't always nurture relationships as well when you're in a district and you're just kind of like going about your business and you're so focused. And so I just have to say, Ariane is she's a connector, and she's just a wealth of connections and relationships. And so the two of us are a really great pairing, and she really brings that to the table.
Dynamite. I mean, just what an inspiring story here. So if I'm getting it right, Jenna, you grew up cornfields out the front yard, you relocate, and your job, there's orange groves out the workplace, and just kind of surrounded in Florida, like just the perfect place where you can blend all sorts of locally grown produce and products with all the students. Now, I'm guessing that there are some logistical challenges here that you bumped into, because you mentioned 100,000 students. You can't just call someone up and be like, "I need 100,000 oranges for this Friday." As you tried and started to kind of bring this farm to table ideology to school, like what were some of the challenges that you found, and maybe this points to some of the ideas that you have with locally grown.
Yeah, it absolutely does. So I had this early vision in my head, and I didn't share it with maybe anybody, maybe my husband. I'm not sure. I didn't really share it with anybody because it was a big idea, and it's one of those things where you just don't know who will be supportive, and you don't want to sound crazy, and you also don't want to sound like you want to take over. So let me back up. So I was maybe like 5 years into my career or something, and I had the naivete of being young and thinking you could do anything. And I already knew then, like, I want to be a director. So I knew from the beginning that that's where I wanted to end up. And the vision that I had was this office space that someone would give me money to build, because when you're working in a school district, you don't have a whole lot of money. Someone was going to give me money to build this beautiful office, and it was going to be on a teaching farm.
Cool.
And so I mean, I could visualize it in my head. If I was a better drawer, I could draw you a diagram of it. And we would have these big windows that would look out onto this teaching farm, and this would be the school nutrition office, and it would have a teaching kitchen space for us to bring together our staff, because we had 1,000 employees, so we couldn't even. It was a real challenge just to get everybody in one room
Right.
for training. And so we would have a beautiful space where we could bring our employees in for training, and then we would bring students throughout the county to our teaching farm and learn about growing food and rotate that food back into our cafeteria meals. And that idea was in my head, and then I started to learn that there were actually people doing this. Like, there's some amazing in Vermont, there's some examples. Sarasota County, here in Florida, has done some amazing things, and Beverly Gerard is their former director. She's actually on our board of directors for Locally Grown. But I didn't know that when this vision popped into my head, and then I started to learn that these things are possible. But I also started to realize early on how difficult anything like that would be to achieve. And so that seed was planted in my head, but I kept it to myself for a very long time. And then when I became director, I just kept coming back to it. And yet I was a director for 5 years, and I was like, am I ever going to achieve that vision? There are so many challenges. I have to give so much credit to all the professionals working in school nutrition, because it's one of the most fulfilling, frustrating, and challenging careers I think that's out there. And I soon realized that that was going to be really hard for me to achieve, but I still thought I was going to do it, right? So until I decided like that I needed to leave my formal role in school nutrition, which again, like I said, was such a hard decision. Um, I still thought I was still working on all of those things. And so when I left, all of a sudden I had like what I felt was unfinished business. I was like, I don't want to let that dream go. You know what I mean? I can still see so much value in that. How can I still maybe adapt that dream and turn it into something different? And so that definitely inspired Locally Grown, because what I found was that I wanted to do more farm to school. And over the course of the 10 years that we tried, we managed to have a couple local, Florida farms that we connected with. We were serving fresh corn and fresh green beans, and those farmers came to the school and they would educate the students and some really amazing things, right? But the amount of time and effort it put in to build that one farmer relationship was a lot when you're a school nutrition director, or maybe just a menu planner or whatever role you have so much on your plate. And so trying to devote time to farm to school as much as you might want to, there's a million other things that you have to
Right.
make sure are in place, and it can be a priority of yours, but a lot of other things get in the way.
Sure.
And so we kind of decided that if farm to school is important and it's something that we think we should devote time to, then we think it needs to be an external
Okay.
endeavor. And so we decided early on that somebody needed to be devoted to farm to school, external from the school system, to remove a lot of the barriers and to ensure that it was sustainable, so that someone was always dedicated to that cause, so that something else wouldn't come along and divert attention
I gotcha.
away.
That is awesome. Now, just real quick, if I recall right, your office in Polk County, like the nutrition office, wasn't it like a former bank building, like bank with like drive-through tellers and everything?
You're close. When you came to visit us, yeah, we were at a auxiliary
Uh
office,
huh.
not the main district
Yeah.
office, and it was a former medical
Okay.
building. Yeah, so it was a doctor's office, so it did have a drive-through, but that was, I think, for like patient drop-off and stuff. And they had converted it, and then when I left, we were in even a different office, so we had moved
Yeah,
into
that's
another
awesome.
auxiliary
But it
office.
definitely gave you the idea of like, hey, look, we can have this space, this educational space where we can educate students, hold trainings, and it's just super proximate to locally grown, farms, all that good stuff. It's a possibility if we can turn a medical office into a school nutrition office.
Right, we can do anything.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking like, look, you probably with all the optimism that you bring, like, hey, this is great. We've got all these locally sourced products. We've got farmers. Let's just like get out there and do it. Let's connect this locally grown food to these students, and let's just have the world's greatest, farm to school operation ever. And as you kind of jumped into that, you just realized like, holy smokes, this is a lot of work, and I don't know if I have capacity for a lot of work because I got to plan menus. I've got 100,000 kids to feed every day. Like there are all sorts of challenges that, as an operator, just kind of pile up, and I don't know if I have time to devote this. So what you're saying, if I'm hearing right, is like locally grown essentially is like let us kind of own the relationships, the procurement, like help you figure out everything that you'd like to do in a farm to school program, but just have it done externally rather than having to devote, internal full-time resources, you know, to it in addition to everything else that needs to get done in the day of a school nutrition operator.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think in my experience, when I'm talking to school nutrition professionals, like they mostly love the idea of farm to
Right.
school. And a lot of districts would love to do more. And that's just it. Like they don't always have the time. And so if we can figure out how to make that easier, so that really they just have to make some of those purchasing decisions and just kind of collaborate
Yeah.
basically, then I think we have a winning
Yeah.
combination.
That's awesome. Now look, Jenna. So I'm in technology, right? And I'm gonna make the argument, and you're gonna have to like coach me on this. But to me, an orange is an orange is an orange. Like it's an orange, whether that's grown in Florida, like right out my front door, or whether it's coming from Idaho. I don't know. Like an orange is an orange. I peel it, I eat it, I hopefully enjoy it, and I move on with my life. What, Jenna, is the appeal to like locally grown food? What's the appeal?
I'm so glad you asked. And no, an orange is not an orange. First of all, most of the oranges grown in Florida, believe it or not, are for juicing. So they turn most of our oranges into juice. If you're going to eat an orange, you're probably getting it from California, even though a lot of people from Florida think Florida oranges taste better, even if they're intended for juice. But to your question, there is so much here that we could go into. So I'll try to keep it brief, but there's so many reasons why local food makes so much sense. From a nutritional standpoint, when you can harvest something and then consume it in a shorter time frame, you retain a lot more of the nutrients and you can harvest it at the right time. So if I need to get oranges from California to Florida, if I harvested them when they were perfectly ripe, by the time they got to Florida and they got to the grocery store, you wouldn't be able to consume it because it wouldn't be good anymore. So there's a whole lot that goes on behind the scenes when it comes to putting that produce in the grocery store and getting it there. A lot of our food is stored for a lot longer than people would probably imagine. And they do some things to that produce to make sure that it ripens. We won't go too deep into that, but if you can shorten that, right, and you can bring it all closer to home, you can harvest it when it's fresh, and then you can consume it, and you have a lot better, nutritional retainment. We would get sweet corn. I have to give a shout out to RC Hatton Farms. So they were our first farm to school partner here in Florida, and they are amazing people and they do amazing things. And so we would get sweet corn from them and it would be super fresh. Like they would harvest it, package it up, and then, drive it to our distributors within a week, And so we were super fortunate to have access to something like that. But even on a much smaller scale, so something that I love right now is the growing explosion of home gardening and urban gardening. So in Tampa, for example, there's a newer urban farm and it's just a 2-acre farm. And it's a really cool story because it was the property was owned by the school district. There used to be a school district or a school there. It was an elementary school. And it's in a neighborhood where the first principal was the first African-American principal in Hillsborough County. So it's a really neat story. But they ended up giving the land over to this urban farm. It's a 2-acre farm and it's a CSA, which is community supported agriculture. So that means you can buy a membership to the farm ahead of time to support the farm so that they can grow food and then you have access to that food. Or they also just have like a weekly market. So I take my son there every weekend and we pick up produce and they do lettuce and they have chickens and you can get eggs and all kinds of really neat things. And so the nutritional value, to go back to what we were talking about, of that lettuce that I'm getting there is going to be far and above, lettuce maybe that's coming from California or Arizona, which is where a lot of our industrial lettuce farms are, right? So again, it's just one of those things where when you start to realize and examine where your food's coming from and how it's grown, you can uncover a whole lot. And I started getting just really excited about the possibilities of what we could build in terms of rebuilding sort of a more vibrant local food system. Because still a lot of the agriculture in Florida is still large farms, which there's nothing wrong with, which we definitely need. But there's something really amazing about smaller farms where people can get involved. So I take my son and we volunteer at that farm that I was just talking about because it's close to us and they always need volunteers and you can actually take part in the food you're growing. And when it comes to serving kids, when they get their hands dirty and they see how their food is grown, they will try just about anything. It doesn't always mean they'll like it, but there's this really cool local chef that does taste testing at that farm on the weekends. And my son will try anything he puts out there. And sometimes he thinks, that it's awful. One day he tried something and it was like super spicy, but he'll try it, right? But if I'm at home and I try to put something on his plate that's like new and different, he's like, no, I'm not having it. Like, no thanks. So that's kind of the power of involving kids and letting them see where their food was grown. The closer it is to them, the more connection they can have to it. So when they can meet the farmer and they know or can see where that food was grown, it just kind of unlocks something in the kids, and it makes this connection that really opens them up to being willing to try more healthy products.
That's awesome, Jenna. Yeah, I love it. So, when you talk about downtown Tampa and this idea of urban agriculture kind of pops up, do you think urban agriculture is kind of a trend, a sustained trend that we're going to see kind of over the next decade plus?
I really do. I think that local food systems are going to answer a lot of the problems that we're seeing. I think we got a glimpse into some issues that were kind of built into our supply chain in this
Right.
country during the pandemic. All of the sudden things that we took for granted at the grocery store weren't always there. Still today, I mean, we're
Sure.
still seeing that, right? That not everything you had before was there. And like I said, we have a lot of people to feed in this country and in the, across the globe. So industrial agriculture has its place and it's sometimes needed. But I really think that we're going to start sort of, I like this concept of looking back to look forward. So there's a lot of things that building a more local food system can start to transform a community. I was listening to a really amazing podcast on regenerative agriculture, and they said, like, heal the soil to heal the community. And so there's all these really cool things that can happen when you start to examine, okay, where's our food coming from and what opportunities do we have to bring that closer to home. And when you're in an urban area and you have a lot of people, the farms get pushed farther and further away from those
Yeah.
urban areas for obvious reasons, right? Because there's development and people need places to live. And so what you do is you find little pockets of open land, and you don't need a lot. Like I said, there was this, the school district owned this 2 acre plot of land, and now they can feed quite a few people from the produce that's grown there on a 2 acre farm. And there's also a lot of really exciting things happening, like in community gardens. And so throughout Hillsborough County, we have an amazing network of community gardens. And so when you have a community garden, you're actually doing it yourself. So each person has their own little plot, and you come and you take care of your little plot. And then there's this whole community and connections that you make within your community, and you share because your little plot probably has more
Yeah.
broccoli than you need or than you can eat. And so you
That's
share
cool.
it, and they share their lettuce with you and things like that. And so I think that there's so many things that can be healed when we come together to grow food and share it
That's
with
great.
our neighbors. There's just some amazing things
That's
that can
great. Now,
happen.
Jenna, you're in the heart of agriculture land in Florida, where you can pretty much grow anything year round. Like, let's just suppose I'm a food service director operator here in Denver, Colorado. I work downtown. What is there really like a positive return on investment that you can make if I was like, let's test our get our feet wet. Let's try some urban agriculture. Let's go out and find a relationship, a small plot of land here in downtown or somewhere. Is there like, can you build a case that this is going to make me a more profitable, cafe experience?
The economic case for farm to school is a little bit trickier, and it takes a little time to figure that out. And that's actually one of the
Yeah,
barriers. One of the things that shocked me was that local produce is oftentimes more expensive than
it is.
something coming from somewhere else. And
Why is
I
that?
spent a lot of time
Yeah,
like scratching my head trying to figure that out. I'm still uncovering that, to be quite honest. There's just a lot of that's when you start to uncover how complex our food system can be, and that's when the light bulbs, your eyes get kind of big, and you start to realize when you're peeling back that onion, there's a
yeah,
lot of layers. So that is something that we are very much engaged in uncovering and trying to work on advocacy efforts too, to make sure that there's investment in the ability for schools to buy more local food. And so there's some really amazing things coming out of USDA right now. They just released some additional funds that are going to go into the commodity food program. And one of the things we really want to work on is the DoD Fresh program, which can allow you to use your commodity dollars for local
sure.
purchases through the DoD Fresh program. So there's some opportunities there. but the economic case for local is not always right off the bat. And so sometimes you have to work on that. Where it can help you though is oftentimes, like I said, local produce is going to be more nutritious. It's going to taste better. And if you do the education piece alongside with it, kids are more likely to consume it. So you're going to end up with less waste oftentimes, which is super important. And I think you can overall increase your overall sales in your program because I think you can energize a new customer base and you can get kids excited about your food because you can find new ways to
Sure.
cook the local produce and you can market it. And I shouldn't just say produce, there's a lot of other local,
Right.
depending on where you live, right? You might have access to local beef
Right.
or local chicken and things like that. So I think the long-term picture of investing in farm to school makes economic sense, but there is definitely like a lot of steps in between that have to take place sometimes to make
And
that all
I'm
work out.
positive that we've probably got some listeners out there who, are probably jumping up and down saying, yes, we do, we do farm to table, farm to school. And yes, there's the positive ROI. It just, from my perspective as an outsider, like I can see some of the variables that contribute to success. I can see some of the tangible benefits as you talked about, just more holistically, it's healthier. There's an ownership sense of, when I'm involved and I can see this being made, I have accountability for its success. And I want to taste the foods. I'm more exploratory with what's being presented to me. All these great kind of benefits to it. I'm just curious, have we figured out the economic model so that it, I'm sure once we do, and if we can, like it'll start to scale out even more. I think that's great. Um, I probably just like kind of transition as we're starting to talk about some of the obstacles that prevent, farm to table ecosystems. What in your experience you talk about just start to finish from farming, the supply chain, relationship management and then costing. What are some of the bigger obstacles that you feel like, as a food service industry we're going to have to figure out?
Yeah, I think, farm to school kind of has three components. So local purchases, an education component, and then a gardening component, usually some kind of hands-on experiential learning for the students. And figuring out how to do all three is kind of the key to success. If you do just one of those three or two of those three, you don't really get the full benefit of a full farm to school program. This is another reason why I really believe that ultimately to make farm to school more accessible to all districts, they need so much support. Trying to do all three pieces from within a school district is very resource heavy and it's very challenging. And so I think you kind of have to have those things concurrently. And so you start building farmer relationships and you start
Yeah.
building out that network. And we need a lot of advocacy in that space as well because farming has a lot of working parts and they get the finances of farming has a lot of working parts, and so making sure that government programs really encourage farmers being able to keep their produce local is going to be really important. And then if you only do the local purchases, which if you look at the farm to school census that is done
Right.
every year nationally, and there's lots of great statistics on farm to school, a lot of districts will say that they serve local foods. And sometimes that's like milk, which is sort of low hanging fruit because the milk is a little bit easier to get locally. And they'll say that they serve local products, but then when you start to look at the percentages of districts that do the education piece or have gardens in schools or some kind of experiential learning, the percentages go way down. And so what you'll see is, yes, we're serving this local produce. And what if we're serving that local produce and we paid more for it? Because we already talked about how oftentimes you might be paying more to get local produce, but we're just putting it out there. Like we're just
Right.
putting it on the lunch tray. Well, that's not really going to make the impact that you might want to see. And so there's a lot that goes into getting the students involved and really marketing that. And from my experience, districts in general have really low marketing resources. And I know in what you do, you've seen that. And Nutrislice does a lot to elevate that in a lot of ways. But if you're not marketing the foods and the innovative things you're doing, then students don't know about it. They don't even understand, and parents
Yeah,
don't know, right? So it just kind of falls flat. And then even if you don't go a step further, right? If you don't let the kids get involved and kind of get their hands dirty, they still might be really apprehensive to trying new foods. And so when you can have a school garden, or like I was saying earlier, maybe it's easier for the district to have one large teaching farm instead of individual school gardens. Just somewhere where the students can come and really get their hands dirty and see that, they're way more likely to then consume those foods. And so you have that full circle program that can
that's
really make
awesome. It's
impact.
it's just like a a chair, a three-legged chair, a stool or something. You take one of those legs out, it's gonna crumble. And you obviously need the
Yeah.
the relationships with the farmers, the food. You need to engage the students and educate them, and then also empower them in some way so that they're involved in the experience.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you brought that up because that's really a big piece of what we want to do as well is get student input. And so over this next year, we're going to be doing a major deep dive and like a planning process here in Hillsborough County. And we're going to really get input from the community and from other experts and and most importantly our students. And so we're going to have student focus groups and we're going to find out what they think, right? And figure out where they are at and what they want this to look like.
Yeah.
And that was always a challenge for me as well in a district. Again, you're so time strapped and it's like we need to figure out what the students are saying, right? And so you would try to go do a focus group, but it was just always really hard to give that
Right.
time and attention. And we want that to be a really key
You
component
kind of build the
of
idea
farm
that
to
maybe
school that we
this
build out.
farm to school process, this, in order for it to be successful, the playbook maybe does require an outside resource that's, singularly focused on helping your farm to school take off and be successful. Jenna, we've had this conversation before. I think as we kind of guide the plane in to land and close up today, but there's one more topic that I think is important, and it's this idea of an equitable food system. And you know, equality in today's day and age is definitely something to be discussed. And you're like I mean, I'm fascinated that you can see that like even in our food systems, we need to be equitable. Help us understand what that means. Coach us through it, why it's important.
Yeah, when you look at sort of the just the basic concept of food access, you start to uncover a lot of inequities that exist in the type of foods that different families have access to and what that looks like, their ability to access food that maybe is culturally relevant to them. Um, and so you start to uncover a lot of inequities in the food system, and farm to school can really uniquely start to work on that and uncover some of that and kind of make some impact there. There's some amazing work being done by the National Farm to School Network, and they've really been focusing in on this equity lens and showing how building local food systems and farm to school programs can really make an impact in this space. And it touches sort of every sector. So it touches the consumer and making sure that everybody has access to the type of foods that they want to serve to their families. Whether that's organic or local or whatever that looks like, that they can make those choices and have access to that without saying, well, I can't afford that. I live in a food desert, so all that's around me is a convenience store. That's the reality
Yeah,
for a lot of families. Like they have to go pretty far just to
right,
go to a nice
right.
grocery store, for example. Um, and so there's elements for the consumer that need to be worked on. And then I always like to remind people like, let's take a look at what's happening on the farm, and look at who's working on the farm, what those conditions look like, and making sure that we have equity there as well, so that we have good farm conditions. So to your point earlier, where you say, why does it cost more to get local produce? A lot of times it may have to do with if you're trying to buy local produce and it's a smaller farm, if they have really good worker conditions and they're paying their farm workers a living wage, well, that's going to translate into a
Mhm.
little bit of a higher cost for
Right.
the end product, right? So that's just a brief window into that as well. That's super important. And then also when you look at who the farmer is, it's really important to us that we inspire sort of a new generation of people to get involved in farming, because if you look at some of the statistics, there's a very large number of farmers who are close to retirement in the United States. And we have to replace them or we're not going to have food to eat. We take a lot for granted, right? And there's a lot of family farms in this country that get passed down. But if the next generation doesn't want to do that anymore, that farmland is at risk for development or any number of other things. And so we need to really make sure that we are inspiring that next generation, that growing food for your neighbors is a really awesome, career to consider. And we want there to be equity in that space as well. And we also want to make sure for us, as we are developing our network of the farms that we work with, we want to make sure that we have, diversity in the types of farmers that we're looking for to work with in our programs.
That's awesome. Well, Jenna Kaczmarski, fantastic conversation today. As we kind of close up, there's probably just one or two rapid fire questions for you. The first one, let's pretend that my mom is listening. Hi, Mom, if you're out there.
My mom will be.
Your mom might know something about, farm to table, farm to school systems. If there's one takeaway from today that you would wish this novice learner, listener could take away, what would that be?
I would encourage them to maybe just take a closer look at where their food comes from, right? And explore what's going on around them. So when I started doing that, it was a really amazing experience. And so there can be little hidden pockets of agriculture going on around you that you don't even know are there. So I found 3 or 4 farms that I didn't even know existed, and I've lived here for 16 years. And so find them, go to a farmer's market and get involved, because it's for your mental health. To me, it's really also like a really great way to like decompress and connect with nature. And I think it's a really valuable use of your time.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, someone who's a full-fledged food service operator, what's the takeaway to them as they've gone through? What would you want them to do as a result of, being introduced to you and hearing all about farm to school?
Yeah, well, what I love about farm to school, and it can branch out to farm to trade, table, like whatever venue you're operating, because I know you have a wide range of listeners. Farm to school and farm to table, farm to institution, whatever sector you're in, can be an amazing win on multiple levels, which is why I love it. So it can be a win for your program because you can introduce new products that are high quality and great for your consumer. It can be a win for your bottom line, especially if you have an operation where you have more control over your price point. And so it can be a real win because you can really elevate the quality, and you can really increase your sales through promoting the local and the higher quality foods. It's also a win for your community. And so you're helping out local farms, you're helping out the economy in your local community. So a lot of people now are talking about the triple P bottom line, which is people, profit, and planet. And so any kind of local food system and bringing that into your operation hits all 3 of those. And so it's a win on all of those levels, which is why I think it can go well beyond schools. And if you can get your local community to be working on local food systems outside of schools, right? So you can do the hospitals and you can collaborate with restaurants. Well, now you have more power together, because anytime you can have purchasing power that is larger, it can have big impact. And so all of a sudden, local agriculture can make a lot of sense when you have a lot of purchasing power wanting that product.
Well, Jenna Kaczmarski, amazing, co-founder of Locally Grown. She has served millions and millions of meals to millions and millions of consumers deep in the heart of Florida. Very, very passionate about all things local, working the relationships, getting the right education and the communication touch points. Put it together, this company, Locally Grown. We have the website in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today, and what a pleasure to have had this conversation.
Mike, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and I really appreciate the support. And yeah, definitely check us out. We are obviously just launching this endeavor. We are a nonprofit. I want to point that out. And so we are in the heart of securing funding and donations and all things that go along
Fantastic.
with that. So
Well, thank you.
thank you
And
so much.
to everyone else, thank you for joining today. It is always a pleasure to spend a few minutes together, talk about the various aspects of food service, and trying to get takeaways that we can use in our days to make them better, to be more productive, more innovative. Thank you very much for your time today, and we will catch you on the flip side.